Welcome, everybody. It's Mental Health Monday. So about my friend Darlene Lancer, JD, LMFT, is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She specializes in relationships, narcissism, and codependency. In her private clinical practice, she has treated individuals and couples for over 30 years and coaches internationally. She's a sought-after speaker at national conferences, in media, and to professional groups and institutions. Before becoming a psychotherapist, Ms. Lancer was a successful entertainment lawyer. You can connect with Darlene on her website, which is whatiscodependency.com. And on there, and I hope we'll have a chance to go to talk a little bit more about this at the end, but Darlene's got so many books that are available. One's Dating, Loving, and Leaving a Narcissist, others about dealing with narcissists. She's got a book called Codependency for Dummies. 10 steps to 12. I mean, there's so many. I'm sure that Darlene will share about them probably towards the end of her presentation. I met Darlene, I think, online somehow. I don't really remember when, but it was a very long time ago when She Recovers was just a kind of a baby back in probably around 2011 or 2012 when we formed the first She Recovers Facebook page. And we were delighted to have Darlene as a panelist on stage with us at She Recovers in LA in September 2018. So it's been a while, Darlene. That's probably the last time I spoke or saw you, and I'm really delighted to see you. And I have to say, I was on our morning gathering this morning, and I can't think of a better date. And I know that this date was moved from earlier this month because I was ill. But I'm really glad people are talking all about boundaries because of the American Thanksgiving holiday. So on our meeting this morning, people were sharing their strategies. Others were begging for strategies. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Over to you.
Developing personal boundaries, cornerstone of recovery. Interesting thing is when you develop boundaries, it improves your self-esteem. And when you have self-esteem, you have better boundaries. So there's a synergistic effect. So it's hard for codependents to set boundaries. And here's some of the reasons. Our parents didn't respect our boundaries. So typically you don't even know that you have boundaries or what that means or when they're crossed. So also codependents tend to put other people's needs and feelings first. They would feel guilty setting boundaries. They also don't know themselves well. So they don't really know maybe what they're feeling or what their needs are. They don't think that they're entitled to them. And then since relationships are so important to many of us, and codependents especially, that we fear that setting boundaries sounds mean and aggressive and that will alienate other people. And again, boundaries are learned, so we never learn to have healthy boundaries. Boundaries improve self-esteem, as I said, and they reduce stress. So people are stressed about the holidays because they're anxious about their need to set boundaries, and maybe they don't know how. So it creates anxiety. Healthy boundaries reduces depression and anger and resentment. It can create win-win situations in a relationship. So you can negotiate your needs, and it improves your decision-making skills. It increases your job satisfaction. You're able to not overgive and overdo and ask for a raise when you feel you deserve it, and say what you're not willing to do, and you'll experience more relief in parenting. You start setting boundaries with your children. I experienced that myself when I started setting boundaries. Instead of nagging and yelling, I just had clear boundaries and consequences. It creates more honest relationships, because a lot of relationships are based on, especially codependent relationships, on guilt and fear, resentment. And one of the reasons is people are not setting boundaries, or the boundaries are not respected. And you have to have boundaries in order to enjoy intimacy. So there are different types of boundaries. The first are the easiest to understand. They're material boundaries. Some people talk about financial boundaries. I've included that. And it's about your belongings and your money. Are you willing to loan people money? Are you willing to loan people your books, your cars? Things I've had couples where one wanted to support an adult child and the other parent thought that they shouldn't be supporting it, things like that. And then physical boundaries has to do with your body, your privacy. Will you let someone look at your phone? Give them your password. Do you lock doors? How much physical space and alone time do you need? People touching you. Are you comfortable with hugs or not? Nudity, that sort of thing. And then there's mental boundaries that have to do with our thoughts, our values, our opinions. Can you hold on to yours? Are you easily swayed or easily manipulated and don't really know what your opinions are or what your values are? Are you very malleable? I wrote a blog recently about moving from chameleon to an individuated self. So typically codependents are like chameleons. They like to go along to get along and blend in. I used to think I was very adaptable and that was a good thing. Well, it meant that I didn't have a strong sense of self. And then emotional boundaries are much more confusing because you can't see them. You can maybe feel them if you're in touch with your feelings, but the problem is a lot of people are in denial. They're not in touch with their feelings. And not only that, they feel responsible for other people's feelings. So when someone with you has this feeling, do you then get immersed in their feeling? Do they have to be happy for you to be happy? If they're angry, do you take it personally? If they're sad, do you feel guilty if you're happy? So just did this again. So it's just being able to hold on to your emotional feelings and that they're separate from others and you're not responsible for other people's feelings. You don't make them feel a certain way. Someone doesn't make you feel guilty. You already have that guilt inside of you. Sexual boundaries, it's about feeling safe and setting boundaries about with whom you'll have sex, when, what you're willing to do, where you're willing to do it, that sort of thing. And spiritual boundaries, that more often is an issue with children, with parents that violate their spiritual boundaries in using God or religion in order to shame them or manipulate them with that sort of thing, or use it to religion or God to punish them. So it's about your spiritual beliefs. Boundaries usually with codependents are dysfunctional. So either they're too rigid, so they have walled off other people, and so they've created walls in order to feel safe, or they're enmeshed. Here's an example of enmeshed boundaries. You're not sure where you begin, where the other person begins, and if you're alone, the circle of yourself is not complete. So you might feel very lonely or incomplete or empty when you're alone. And then when you're with someone, it gets kind of blurry. You tend to lose yourself in a relationship. Healthy boundaries, these circles would be complete. So you can be intimate without losing yourself. You still have a closed circle around who you are. So you can see without boundaries, intimacy can be dangerous because you can lose yourself. I always think of setting boundaries as like graduate level assertiveness, because first you have to learn how to be assertive. And I have an ebook and a webinar on how to be assertive. So you have to be able to identify and name your needs and your feelings. And a lot of people are clueless. They say, I'm upset, and they don't know whether, someone says that to me. I don't know if they feel angry or they're scared or they're sad or ashamed. So being able to name your feelings is important. And your needs. Most codependents are clueless about their emotional needs because they weren't respected in their childhood. So that's the first step, because what's comfortable for you and your feelings is going to be different from maybe other people in your family, maybe even different from what your therapist thinks you should do. So you have to come to know yourself and what's right for you. And then the next step is believing that you have rights. So a lot of people feel like they should put other people first, or it's asking for what they want or saying no is selfish. So you have to believe that you have a right to your feelings, for example, to your opinions, and then stand up for them. So then you have to learn what it means to be assertive. And that doesn't mean nagging or blaming or judging. You did this, or you're making me feel that. It's about making I statements. And then practice that. Practice expressing your feelings, your needs, your wants, your opinions. And then you're ready to set boundaries. You have to know what your bottom line is. You know, what are you just not willing to tolerate? Maybe it's cheating. Maybe it's addiction in a relationship. Maybe it's verbal abuse, physical abuse. You have to know what you're willing to tolerate and what you're willing to, where you're willing to draw the line. Otherwise, you're easily pushed around and manipulated. And the worst thing is to make false threats or make threats that you're not willing to carry out. So then you have to know how to express those boundaries assertively. And then that will take courage. So whether it's your faith, sponsor, practice, support system, friends to help you with the courage to feel entitled and to go through it, because you might not like what how the other person responds. And there may be your fear that it'll jeopardize the relationship. And then often the other person is not going to go along with your boundaries. So then you have the next step, which is maybe even harder, how to set consequences and carry them out. I have a blog called 10 Reasons Why Boundaries Don't Work. People tell me all the time, well, I tried that. I've been setting boundaries for years and he or she doesn't listen. Well, or their children don't listen because there's no consequences. So, and especially when you're dealing with an abuser or a narcissist, it's a different situation. I wrote a whole book with scripts and strategies because the consequences and how you phrase it has to be a little different, because you're dealing with someone who probably doesn't care about your feelings or needs. So this first step in identifying and valuing your needs and feelings, practice it during the day. You're driving in the car, washing the dishes, just taking a walk. Ask yourself, what are you feeling? And you can start off, is it positive? Is it negative? Is it neutral? Even boredom might be a feeling. If you could say, I think, then it's not a feeling. So you don't say, I think sad, I think bored, you feel sad. So start to name your feelings. In my book, Codependency for Dummies, here, that's not coming up. Anyway, it's a list of about 200 feelings. You can probably Google a list. And then say it out loud. Researchers showed when you call yourself by name, it has a bigger impact. So I might say, Darlene, you're feeling sad. So call yourself by name and say it out loud. Now, this is what good parents should do. They tell their toddler, oh, you're feeling hurt. They name their feelings, and that's how children learn a feeling vocabulary. I see that you're angry. And then follow it up by saying, and it's okay. Because often our feelings have been shamed. We weren't allowed to get angry, or don't cry, I'll give you something to cry about. Stop complaining, you're always whining. Just a lot of ways, or just ignoring your feelings. A parent might be too busy or drunk or not care. There are a lot of ways to shame. I wrote a whole book on conquering shame and codependency, to have your feelings shame bonded, is what that's called. So you have to reparent yourself by naming your feelings and telling yourself it's okay. It's okay to be angry. You get into a lot of problems if you don't acknowledge your anger. It just feeds resentment, and you don't set boundaries. So then when you're feeling uncomfortable feelings, ask yourself, what do you need? Do you need to rest? Do you need to talk to a friend? Do you need to set a boundary? Do you need to nurture yourself? What are you needing in that moment? And then go ahead and meet your needs. And finally, don't judge your feelings and needs. Honor them. There is no right or wrong. They don't even have to be rational. Just honor them. And that's the first step in healing. And then, what are your rights? You have to feel, as I said, entitled. So, maybe on a piece of paper, jot down a sentence completion. I have a right to, and then complete that sentence. And just keep writing stems to that. I have a right to. Here's some examples. I have a right to my feelings. I have a right to my privacy. I have a right to be left alone, to change my mind, to be illogical. I have a right to say no and to disagree. And I don't need to give justifications. No is a complete sentence. I have a right to cancel commitments, to make mistakes. You don't have to be perfect. So if you were judged and criticized a lot as a child, you might be doing that to yourself. Generally, people have an internal critic that replicates the way they were treated as a child. So you have a right to be spoken to with courtesy and with respect, and to have your needs and feelings, even if someone doesn't meet your need, to not shame you for it. And you have a right not to be interested in what someone's talking to you about. If someone's gossiping about someone else and you don't want to listen, you have a right not to listen or not to even care. And just conserve your energy. You don't have to be helping everybody and doing everything for everybody. You have a right to rest. A lot of people don't think they have a right to rest. They're on automated doer all the time. And a right to control your body and your space. So think about what you feel entitled to or not entitled to. If you don't feel entitled to some of these, ask yourself why and how this plays out in your life. And then there's an exercise you can do at home, is to write out, as I said, write out these rights that you think you have, and then make a fist with your right hand, and if you're right-handed, and then stamp your foot and say, I have a right to my feelings, and say it like you mean it, and go through your whole list and see how that feels. I did that at the seminar with She Recovers in 2018, and almost everyone in the room started giggling. And it showed how uncomfortable people are with asserting their rights. And so, of course, it's going to be hard to set boundaries if you don't think you're entitled to anything. So here's a simplified version of setting boundaries, and that is to listen to your feelings. As I said, honor your needs and wants and feelings, and then express them clearly, firmly, and kindly. People think that assertiveness often is mean, but that's not the case. When you do it correctly, it's with courtesy and kindness. You don't have to raise your voice. And it's not mean, it's just respecting yourself. And to set boundaries, as I said, you're going to need to know your bottom line. What is non-negotiable with you? So I had clients that have gone along with all sorts of behaviors that violate their values. And years later, they feel guilty and they can't understand why they didn't say no. Well, usually it's because they either thought they didn't have a right, or that was to protect, they thought it was going to protect the relationship, and that it would jeopardize it if they said no. So again, being assertive is neither passive, going along, or passive aggressive. A lot of people are passive aggressive, so they act aggressive, but they don't verbalize it. So that could be very difficult if you have a partner who's passive aggressive, because it's a way of covert hostility. For instance, slamming doors or being late for things, forgetting things on purpose. So that type of behavior. But assertiveness is clear, it's concise, it's calm, it's courteous. You make I statements. It's congruent. Your words and your body language is in sync. So you're not smiling when you're angry. You're not smiling when you're sad. Because people will believe your body language before they'll believe your words. And it confuses them when you send mixed signals. So these are some tips you can do when you're being assertive or setting boundaries, and that's to breathe into your belly to relax you. Write out what you're going to say. Practice what you want to say. In my webinar, there's how to be assertive. There's scripts and exercises you can do to role play with yourself or with someone else. And visualize. Practice it, the whole scene in your head, and practice saying it aloud. And then keep your goal in mind, because sometimes, especially someone who's very defensive, will try to change the subject. They will put you on the defensive, or they will bring up something else and try to change the subject to avoid responsibility. So keep your goal in mind. So you are in charge of the communication, the conversation. You use a normal speaking voice, and you make eye contact and good posture, because again, your body language communicates your power and to be more convincing. And keep it short and specific. You want to be concise. I mentioned 4 or 5 C's: clear, concise, calm, courteous, and congruent. I didn't put that up there, and I statements. And then you don't make judgments. You don't judge the other person. You don't say you this or that. You could say, when you slam the door, I didn't like that. So you could describe their behavior. When you interrupt me, but you don't say you're rude, you're inconsiderate. Those are judgments that are going to put the other person on the defensive, and you're not going to get your point across. It's better to get your anger out with someone else, and then you figure out exactly what you're going to ask for, what you want to say. The goal of communication is to have the other person hear you. So it might be helpful to repeat the other person's point of view to show respect. And you don't have to justify with a lot of explanations. There's a whole, and again, when you're dealing with someone that's abusive and highly defensive, there's a whole list of about a dozen don'ts that I put in my book, Dating, Loving, and Leaving a Narcissist. You don't want to explain or justify or defend yourself. There's something called JADE. You don't justify, you don't argue, you don't defend, and you don't explain. And you don't plead, and you don't nag. The list goes on, because you lose your power when you do that. So here's some simple responses. No, as I said, is a complete sentence. Stop it. I don't like it. I don't like it when you slam the door. Please don't do that. I'll think about it. When somebody asks you something, you don't have to have an answer on the spot. Just say you'll get back to them. You could say, I don't want to listen to that, if they're going on about something that's upsetting them. Or someone wants you to do something or asks you to do something, you can just thank them, or they give you advice. Thank you for considering me or your concern, but that doesn't work for me. Don't interrupt me. Don't raise your voice at me. And then just, I disagree, very simply. If someone's blaming you, what you could say is, I don't take responsibility for that. End the conversation. You don't have to justify, defend, blame them. Just say, I don't take responsibility. That ends the conversation. Or just say, that's your opinion. You might have to give up wanting to be right. If you're with someone highly defensive, they're not really interested in your opinion. They're interested in power. So if you're caught up on trying to make them understand you or see it your way, you're going to be stuck in these repetitive arguments. And that might be, go back to your childhood where you didn't feel understood and you're trying to work this out with someone who maybe like a parent who is not interested in your feelings or your opinions. And then, as I said, people, you may have to set consequences, especially if you're in a relationship that's ongoing and established. It's harder to change the boundaries than at the beginning. And remember that consequences are not to punish the other person, it's to protect you. So it's not necessarily to get someone to do something. It might be that you're going to leave the room if they raise their voice or belittle you. Take baby steps. You don't say, if you ever swear at me again, I'm getting a divorce. If you're not ready to do that, start out small, because leaving the relationship is a bigger boundary. Or it may be a relationship you can't leave, like with a child, or maybe with a parent, or a co-parent. So you have to think through ahead of time what you're willing to do and not willing to do. So you never make threats that you won't carry out, because that's like the boy that cried wolf, and you won't be taken seriously. So be consistent. Don't back down. You might have to, it's hard to change behavior. It's hard enough for us to change ingrained habits. So, and you might be, if you're listening to this, you're motivated, but the other person you're talking to might not be interested in making any changes or working on themselves. So it's going to be harder for them to make changes. So you may have to repeat it and do it with kindness, because it's hard for them to remember. And again, align your behavior and your words. If you say, don't call me anymore, and then your ex keeps calling you and you keep answering the phone, they've won. They just wanted you to pick up the phone. So just pick up the phone and say, I said, don't call me. It's your words and behavior are not in alignment. And it's important, again, to get support, to encourage you and to reinforce these new behavioral changes. So what are some signs of healthy boundaries? When you're able to say no, when you don't let others abuse or exploit you, when we can hold our ground, even when you're pressured. So some people tell me, well, I set the boundary, but my spouse was just relentless and then I gave in. Well, you have to be able to hold your ground. You might have to go call your sponsor or a friend or somebody to help you stay firm with your boundary. And the other person, especially if they have a personality disorder, may really raise the stakes, and it could be very scary. So you need to hold firm if you're really serious about this boundary. And usually they'll find a way to back down from their position. So knowing that you're not responsible for other people's feelings and problems, you're not offended by other people's when they set boundaries. A lot of times, if you're uncomfortable setting boundaries, then you'll think the other person must not like me if they're setting a boundary. But when you start setting boundaries, you'll be more comfortable with other people's boundaries too, and you'll appreciate it in a relationship. You'll want people to set boundaries with you. When people criticize you, you don't take it personally. You know, it's their opinion. You have a filter. You have this invisible boundary. If someone says something about you, think, well, is that true? Is it not true? Or maybe partially true? And you can agree to some of it, but not all of it. Or you could just say, well, I don't agree. So that's your emotional boundary. You filter these things. But when you're triggered, you don't blame the other person. You take responsibility for your own triggers and trauma. And then you can respect other people's opinion. You don't have to have them agree with you, because someone who's dogmatic is insecure. They're trying to force you to agree with them so they'll feel more secure. But when you're secure, you don't need other people to agree with you. Your boundaries, your circle is closed. You know who you are. And then intimacy is more comfortable. You can get close because you're not afraid of losing yourself. So as Dawn said, my website is whatiscodependency.com. You can also find me at darlenelancer.com. And I blog every month. And 3 blogs on boundaries are The Power of Personal Boundaries. And the second one I mentioned already. And if you follow my blog, you can get 14 tips for letting go. I post daily on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, on Twitter, and I've written about 10 books, but there's a ebook and a webinar on assertiveness. And the 3 paperbacks I've written are Codependency for Dummies, Conquering Shame and Codependence. This is the blue one is the webinar, and the yellow and navy is the ebook on assertiveness. And here are the paperbacks: Conquering Shame and Codependency, Dating, Loving, and Leaving the Narcissist is my newest book. It has lots of scripts in there and a whole chapter on listing about 50 different types of abuse and how to deal with manipulation, and Codependency for Dummies. I have other ebooks that finding self-forgiveness and overcoming perfectionism, raising your self-esteem, and how to overcome self-criticism. And on my website, there's also some meditations you can get. So there's links to everything on my websites. So that's it, Dawn. I'm ready for any questions.
Wonderful, Darlene. Thank you so much. I have to say, we just, we've had 50 participants in the webinar today, and really, really very active chat. I couldn't keep up with the questions in the chat. I don't know if Lisa or Carrie were able to. I see that some of you have dropped your questions in the Q&A, and we're going to start with the Q&A. So that's the best place to put your questions. Very lively and well-informed conversation taking place. And there's a few people just commenting, amazing thing. Such good, useful, straightforward, easy to understand information. And, it's almost like, for me, I want to say, you make it sound so easy. And honestly, as a person who's done a lot of practice, setting boundaries and then holding them, it's one of the hardest things we can ever do, especially in our recovery. Yeah. But it's the emotional part of it that's so hard, right? Because it really is pretty straightforward. All of these wonderful tools and ideas that you've presented are pretty straightforward. It's just, you just have to try it a few times, realize that you will live, even though you feel like you're going to drop dead over the anxiety of it. And so.
Especially if you're emotionally charged. Yeah. So even assertiveness can be hard. Like if you're upset at someone and you're hurt or you're angry, exactly. It's hard to remember to be assertive. But
maybe we have a kind of a question that might kind of speak to that a little bit. Okay. So when setting boundaries, is it better or more productive to wait until after the situation where the boundary is crossed passes, so it's less in the moment? Or is it better to do it right away and nip it in the bud so it doesn't have a chance to happen again? I find people tend to respond better if I wait, but I then have to feel more uncomfortable for longer or risk it being crossed again in the meantime. Great question.
Yeah, well, I don't think there's one answer or the other. If you're able to do it in the moment, great. If you're just learning about boundaries, you probably would be better served to take your time to write down what was said, write down how you feel about it, write down the script, why maybe you didn't, what were the uncomfortable feelings, why you didn't speak up, what are you afraid of, what do you want to happen, and what would be the consequences if you don't set a boundary, what would be the consequences if you do, you know, and some of those, all those questions are in my my ebook and my webinar to really think it through, and then write out a script and practice it. There's no harm done in doing it the next day, or even a couple days later. You say, you know, the other day when you did or said such and such, it's been bothering me and I want to talk about it. So
Great. A reflection from Facebook. I've learned that while I am responsible for what I say, I'm not responsible for how others hear or interpret what I'm saying. To me, this is boundary work. Absolutely.
mm-hmm.
Okay, another question. I'm in a situation where my son and I are now living with my BF, boyfriend, I guess, and his son during the school week. We've often spent a lot of time together, but the new living together dynamic has brought more surprises than I expected in a 3-year relationship. I found my boundaries challenged, and I believe the same for the children and likely my BF. What is a neutral and calm way to create a conversation about this? I had thought to set a date and bring out the whiteboard, but it sounds like in my head that I may be controlling the situation.
Well, maybe a family meeting where people can talk about things that are just in general, including the children, what's bothering them. And like a 12-step meeting, let everybody have a chance to have the floor without crosstalk, so it becomes safe. And then maybe how they could problem solve together. And then, you know, if it gets heated, then you can adjourn and say, well, we'll meet again in a few more days, or let's think about it. Or maybe beforehand, people can write down what they want, what they need, what's upsetting them, and then circulate it. I don't know, you can think of creative ways to maybe have a family meeting about it. Or maybe you want to first talk with your boyfriend, I think, about what's going on before you involve the children, because maybe some of it is just between the two of you. And step family situations can be very tricky because people have different rules about parenting. So you want to, maybe with your boyfriend, as I'm talking, I'm thinking this through more, what are the rules? Boundaries are rules. So what are the rules between the two of you? What are the rules governing the children? And come to some consensus. And how does he feel about you disciplining his children or not? You know, so I think you have to get clear. It's like a company or a corporation. The parents are, you and your boyfriend are the executive team. And so you have to be on board on the same page. And then you deal with whatever's going on with the children as a unit.
Yeah, I have to say, in my recovery, early in recovery, blended a family. And I used to say, like, it was like you threw us in a blender and hit go. Like, it really wasn't smooth at all. It was the most difficult thing one of the most difficult things I've done. So here we have somebody asking, what do you do when someone repeatedly violates your boundaries?
Well, first of all, there's whatever they originally did, and then they're ignoring your boundary. So that's a second violation. And if they're repeatedly violating it, then that says something about there's something going on with them. So I don't know if it's a personality disorder, an addiction, ADD or something, you know, there's something going on with them or some hostility. And first of all, just addressing, you know, I've mentioned this several times, and I don't know, I'm guessing they seem to agree, but then they violated it despite agreeing. If they didn't agree, then they're being consistent. But you could just approach it being curious. So I'm just curious because I've pointed this out several times, and I'm not sure like what the problem is. Did you understand? You know, take kind of a curious, neutral position, not to put the other person on the defensive, because, and then you could say, because now I'm feeling like I don't matter, or my needs or don't matter, or my words, I'm starting to feel. And then you would talk about how, not the original thing, but how being your boundaries being ignored feels in the relationship. And I have a lot of scripts in dating, loving, and leaving a narcissist. That would be typical. And I can't go into that now, but I call it systematic transactional communication, because a narcissist or someone like with borderline personality, or just anyone highly defensive, they might not care about your feelings or needs. So you have to frame things in terms of something that they care about. Like, if you continue to do this, or when you do this, my loving feelings go away. So you're letting them a consequence that happens when they do this behavior, and how it's going to impact your feelings towards them and the relationship. Or I start to get hopeless about the relationship. Or I don't feel like, listening, doing something that they want. I don't feel like being intimate with you. So you let them know the consequences, and in a non-judgmental way, because you don't want to put them on the defensive, especially someone who's highly defensive. Anything that they take as criticism, if you say you don't do this, you never do this, that to them is criticism.
Right.
So,
but I would say, I'm sorry.
That's it.
I think I love approaching with curiosity. And then I think then you get to set another boundary after that conversation, right? Like, I feel like if you're going to continually disregard my boundary, I don't know that we can continue to be in this relationship or
spend
time or
that exactly crossed my mind, but I don't know. This doesn't sound like this person that asked the question is ready to do that, but
right.
You have to think about that. Or what would you do?
Yeah.
If they keep disrespecting you, are you still meeting all of their needs and having sex with them and cooking for them? Or, I don't know. So maybe there's, you said they ignore their boundaries. Have you been setting consequences? Read my blog, 10 reasons why boundaries don't work. Or maybe you're in denial that they're not able to do what you're asking them to do because of some disorder they have, or addiction or something.
Right. Okay, and I'm going to share another reflection. I have come to learn that it's okay that my non-negotiable may be different from what may be okay for others. I've learned that I have a right in my own life to define what I am comfortable with and willing to accept. That's exactly right. And you talked about this at the beginning. It's just, we have to ask ourselves, what are we willing to sustain, put up with, deal with, accept?
That's right. It's going to be different for everybody.
Yeah. How can I stop feeling like a doormat for others? To those I try to help, I feel like they're a punching bag.
Well, I would suggest going to Codependence Anonymous meetings or Al-Anon meetings, get some therapy, because if you're feeling like a doormat, it's because you're going along to get along, I guess. All the things I said, if you're feeling like a doormat, you must be feeling exploited. You're not taking care of yourself. You're not setting boundaries, and you have to ask yourself why and what you're afraid of. And then you got to get into learning how to do that. It's going to take some time. You probably, I would recommend getting some therapy, or at least getting into a 12-step meeting and working with a sponsor to help you. And read Codependency for Dummies. It's a step-by-step recovery program in the book. Do the exercises.
Exactly. And follow Darlene, right? Just continue to kind of pick up on all these resources that are available. Someone's asking, can you please explain again what jade is?
Okay. They're all don'ts. You don't justify, you don't argue, you don't defend, and you don't explain.
Brilliant.
There's more. You don't attack, you don't plead, you don't beg, you don't,
you don't do all the things that we do.
Yeah, there's a lot of things, a list of don'ts with, in my books.
Here's an interesting, with the holidays coming, how do you set boundaries with in-laws? My husband supports no alcohol in the house, but we disagree with how long they stay. I need time to relax, and he won't ask them to stay in a hotel, and he doesn't understand my needs. What should I do?
Well, that's a tough one. Maybe it's not the first time he hasn't understood your needs, but I think maybe you have to explain to him more the consequences to you of what it would like going along with him and what he wants, or maybe negotiate some middle ground. I really can't answer that question because I don't,
Yeah.
I'd have to be working with you as a couple and how you've been communicating in the past. That's right.
Maybe
Maybe, yeah, maybe this woman, you can, or man, you can
Yeah.
negotiate what you're willing to do or not do. Well,
Yeah.
okay, then you have to entertain them because I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to do
Yeah.
my routine.
Or you need to go and leave and do what you need to do, or you need to get on SR meetings or whatever you need to do. Like just kind of set out kind of this is what I'm, it's like a negotiation, right? I
Yeah.
understand it can be uncomfortable with when you're trying to decide about parents.
Mhm.
Having just lost one, and my dad used to come for like a week to a month a year, and my husband did all the caretaking. I do get it. It can be complicated. Can you talk about the differences between expectations and boundaries?
Well, expectations is used in different ways. So you might have unreasonable expectations, like expecting an alcoholic, that's a practicing alcoholic, to be sober. That would be unreasonable. Expecting a narcissist to be empathetic. You know, I have clients all the time saying, oh, my husband or wife is, I ask them one thing and they won't do it. And I do all this for them. Well, that is, they're in denial. You know, so they're expecting a narcissist to treat them the way that they treat the narcissist. That's unreasonable expectation. So in that sense, it breeds resentment. Okay. So you have to know who you're dealing with. On the other hand, it's perfectly fine to expect someone to treat you with respect. So you have to understand the word expect or expectations can be used in different contexts. It's fine to be, yeah.
So it makes me think of, something that I've heard forever. It's like an expectation is just resentment waiting to happen.
Could be, but
right?
let's say you expect to be treated with respect. That doesn't mean you can expect your abuser that you're involved with to treat you with respect.
That's right.
So then it's about expectations about how you want to be treated versus expectations of what the other person is going to do or willing to do. From your experience, you ask, you set boundaries, they continue to be abusive. Well, then maybe your expectation on them is unreasonable, but your expectation to be treated with.
I want to thank you very much for being here today. As you can see, this is a topic that we're all over here at She Recovers for a lot of reasons, but I want to thank you so much. It's been great to see you.